So the one you've all been waiting for, the framing of the workshop structure. At last the rain is stopped, we've got clear blue skies, but what we have got is a harsh frost. So it's going to be a cold old day. The sun's now starting to break through though, so hopefully it won't be too bad. The plan today is to get 4 walls up for the workshop.
Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite.
We've got a couple of clear days in the weather to really make a breakthrough with this and get as much done as we can. If you saw the last episode, you'll have seen that we had absolutely no luck with the weather, and in a couple of days the rain's going to start again. So we need to get as much of this done as we can before that. So for all the walls we're using 4x2 pressure treated timber. Now the first wall we're going to build is the back wall. The first thing we're going to do is just tidy up all the ends of the timber. That just gives for better accuracy when we're building the walls. So we'll put them all on the saw, trim off the ends and then start constructing the wall. So we need to ascertain the height of the wall, and to do that we need to make a few calculations because we need to keep the building within permitted development, and because the edge of the building is within 1 metre to the boundary, we need to make sure that the finished height of the building from the existing ground level is no more than 2.5 metres high, and that will have an impact on the uprights that we're about to cut to create our wall. So we need to do a few calculations to work out the height of those uprights. The first number we need is the height of the pad as it sits currently, and the best way to do that is just fly a level off the pad, grab a tape and take a reading from the highest point of the ground. We've got 110 mil. If we take our total height of 2,500, that's 2.5 metres, and then we take off 110 for the pad. We'll then deduct 45 mil for our bottom plate, that's the bit of timber that sits on the concrete pad, and 45 mil for our top plate, that's the bit of timber that will run horizontally on the top of the wall. So far we're at 2.3 metres. We now need to deduct the thickness of the roof joists. They are 6x2s, so that's 150 mil, and then on top of the roof joists we're going to have 18 mil tongue and groove OSB, so we're going to take another 18 mil off that. But just to make it a little bit more complicated, the overhang on the front is going to be 500 mil long, and over every metre we're going to have a drop of 20 mil on the roof. So that overhang being 500 mil up on the front wall will mean that we need to drop it another 10 mil. So we'll take 10 mil off for the overhang. So it's 2122, but to be on the safe side, I'll take the extra 2 mil off and make it 2120. But I know what you're thinking, we're building the back wall, so why am I calculating the front wall, which is going to be higher? Well, that's because of drop. So over 4 metres, we're going to take off 20 mil per metre. So that drops the height of the back wall in relation to the front wall 80 mil. So to calculate the lengths of the upright for the back wall, we need to take another 80 mil off 2120, and that leaves us 2040. So we now know the length of the uprights for the back wall needs to be 2040. So we'll head over to the miter saw and cut all the uprights for the back wall to 2040. So we're building the walls on the pad and then we're going to stand them up. That makes this the bottom plate and this the top plate. Now what we're going to do is cut our first upright to 2040, place that in between the two, and then we'll use the nail gun with 90 mil nails to fix that in place. If you don't have a nail gun, you can just use an impact driver with some good screws. I'll just square the end of the timber up like that, then using the nail gun, bang in a couple of nails. That is absolutely rock solid. It might be a frosty day, but the coat said to come off. I'm getting hot. Whew. Right, so as you can see, we now have our first upright in over here, and what I'll do now is show you what measurements we use to continue those uprights all the way along the wall. We'll place the tape on the end of the wall, and then we'll make a mark at 400, and then we'll just measure every 400 and make a little mark. So we know we need an upright every 400 mil, but there's one more upright we need, and that is for the adjoining wall. It'll make a little bit more sense later, but this is what you need to do. Your adjoining wall will screw to this wall, and what that'll leave you with is nothing here for the plasterboard to tag onto on the inside. So what you want to do is make a little line, and a little cross, and that tells us that we need an upright there for the plasterboard to tag into. Now I know that might not make a huge amount of sense right now, but it will later on in the series, and it's important that we do that now. So we want an upright at 100mm, and then all the uprights every 400mm all the way along the wall.
You're channeling wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me fear.
So the eagle-eyed of you out there will notice that our wall's not long enough. Now that's because we've got 4.8 metre timbers, but we need to build a 6 metre wall. Now we need to join the wall together. There's a couple of ways we can do it. You could complete this wall, complete the panel, and then make a smaller panel and screw the two together. But that's a little bit more timber intensive. So the way I'm going to do this is place my 1.2 piece of timber onto the 4.8, and that makes 6 metres. I'll then use a small offcut to bridge the joint, and then I'll cut my upright slightly shorter to fit in between because it falls right on the joint. Now that just saves me a little bit of timber, and then what I'll do is make sure that my OSB sheet that goes on here bridges that joint so that you can't get any flex in it. The OSB will give it a little bit of extra strength. So we've constructed the back wall. What we're going to do now is put the OSB sheets on the outside of the wall before we stand it up in position. The reason for that is we use the OSB sheets to actually square the whole thing up. Now we've checked with a corner to corner measurement with the tape, and it's only 3mm out, so it's pretty square already. But what we want to do is use the OSB sheets to square it up, because we know the OSB is dead square out of the factory. So that's why we attach the OSB now at this stage before we stand the wall up, rather than attaching it afterwards, because we're going to use that as our aid to square the walls up. So if you look here, you can see why we made our uprights 400 centres, because the sheet now falls on half of that upright. So we don't need to cut the width of the sheets because they're perfect. All we need to do is cut the height of them, which saves us a little bit of work. So the total height of the wall with the top plate and bottom plate is 2130. So what we need to do is take a couple of mil off the top of the OSB and the bottom of the OSB so that the weight of the building doesn't sit on the OSB. We want the weight of the roof to sit on the top plate and the weight of the total building to sit on the bottom plate. If we make the OSB flush, we could compromise the structure. So we want to take a couple of mil off each. If you hear someone mucking around in the background, that's Chris. He seemed to be appearing in a lot of my videos lately. He's like my version of Rick off Colin Furs. You watch Colin Furs, haven't you?
Colin Furs, good lad.
Yeah, so he's like my version of Rick. He's sort of in the background doing all the jobs that I don't want to do. So anyway, he's now going to cut the length. You can cut the OSB when it's on there if you want to. If you've got a track saw, it's a bit easier because you can set the depth. I haven't got a track saw, so we're doing it the hard way with a circular saw. I'll take you over there so you can see. You can see here the board is flush with the end of the wall. Where if the wall belly's in at the middle, we're not too worried about that. We'll sort that in a minute. What we'll do is now whack a nail in this corner, and then we'll be able to square the board by kicking the wall up or down. You can see us out very slightly because we've got a couple of mil here which we want, and then up here you can see it's running out. So what we'll do is we'll pull the wall this way, which will square the whole thing up. So we'll whack a nail in this corner here to give us a starting point. I've got 50mm ring shank nails in the nail gun now. Again, you can use screws, but it pulls the OSB in very slightly. Whack a nail in the corner, and then what we'll do is kick this wall plate down. And you can see that when I do that, it squares it up. That now brings that flush, so we know that that's dead square now, and we'll do that as we go along. So if we now whack a nail, in that corner, we can then take a look at this top corner. Now just check we're still square on that top corner. Put a nail in there, and we know that that is now dead square, and we'll do that on each board as we run along the wall. Now I'll draw a little mark just along this piece of timber so that I know where to put my nails. You can see the original nails, or screws if you use screws, on the top and bottom plate, so you know where to draw your line, and put nails throughout the sheet. So of course at this point the wall's not going to stand up on its own. So what we're going to do is just pick it up and lay it against the fence for now. Now if you get to this point and you don't have a fence to stand the wall up against, just use a couple of your uprights or something and just create a bit of an anchor to the floor somewhere, and that'll allow you to just hold that wall up and out of the way. So we'll get that out of the way, and then we'll move on to making the side wall, and that one is a little bit more technical because we've got a drop on it. So each upright is going to have a slight angle on it with a little bit taken off, and there's a calculation we can do which I'll show you next. So on to building the side walls, and this gets a little bit more technical than the back wall because we've got that slope or pitch on the roof. What I think's best to do is if I show you by drawing it out, then you'll understand the way I'm going to create the pitch on the roof. So if you imagine this is our side wall, what we want is a slight pitch on the roof. Now that's exaggerated, but you get the general idea. So the water will run off the top just like that. Now you could put an infill piece in here, so you could make a square wall and then infill this piece here. But I don't like that way of doing it. I want these uprights to be continuous. So over the length of our 4 metre wall, we're going to have 10 uprights. Now, if you imagine all of those uprights like that, I know there's not 10, but that doesn't really matter. From the front to the back, our uprights at the front need to be longer than the ones at the back there. And the cuts need to be slightly angled as well. Now this is really easy to work out because if you think we've got 10 uprights, so that's an 80mm drop divided by our 10 uprights, which leaves us 8mm per upright. So I know I need to make each upright, as we go along, 8mm less than the last one. Now each upright needs a slight angle on the top. How do we work out what that angle is going to be? Now you could use a slide bevel for this to give you your angle. Luckily I've built one of these rooms before this size, and I know that last time I went with a 1 degree angle and that was the perfect cut. So I'm going to cheat a bit and I'm going to go with 1 degree because I know that works. 2072, take away 8, 2064 with a 1 degree cut. The pile's going down, which must mean we're building something. So our first side wall is made. Now remember that it's going to be stood up in that direction. What you don't want to do is create your drop the wrong side, because then of course it's a real pain in the backside. So we now know that this is our high point here, this is the top corner, so when we stand up it's in the right position. Of course, just like before, what we're going to do now is just put our OSB on, because we want to square the bottom and sides to make sure the wall is square, and then of course this top piece here runs off at a 1 degree angle, so we just need to run the saw to follow that top plate. That's going to be the easiest way to just take the extra length off the OSB. So what we'll do now is get the OSB on, nail it all down and just chop that bit off the top. So of course we just repeated what we did here on that wall over there, but with the highest point on this side, so we can just stand that one up. So what we got now is 3 walls. We've got the long back wall and the 2 sides, and we've got a back wall propped up against the fence. So what we can do now is just stand one of these side walls up, get it plumb and screw the corner together. We're going to use 100mm screws. I'll show you how we do it. We're just going to plumb it up, square it up. Now our concrete pad here is square, so we should be able to work to that. So when we stand this wall up, we'll get it roughly square, and then we'll get a big square in there to double check it. But for now we can just stand it along the edge of the pad and we should be somewhere where we want to be. So I've got some damp proof course here. I'm just going to roll that along under where our wall's going to sit. It's a bit belts and braces really, because we've got the damp proof membrane underneath the pad, so you shouldn't get any moisture rising up, but it gives you that little extra peace of mind that no moisture can get into the walls. So we're going to stand this wall up first, get that upright. We've got this little rough brace here, just so once we've got it upright we can actually just prop it, and that'll hold it there whilst we lift this wall up, because that's a bit of a 2-man lift, they're quite heavy, and then we can get in the corner there and hold it whilst we screw it. So because we've still got our shuttering in place, we can use that to give us another brace up onto this wall, so we can actually level this wall up. You grab that, Chris. So we can level that wall up so we know it's plumb, and it won't get in the way of this wall here when we put this one in. So we'll just put a little packer in here, 11mm, to allow for the OSB, and that wall can stand up against this. So that kind of holds everything there whilst we get it all plumb and in place. So we've done the same over that end, so we've got 3 braces in now, 1 at each end and 1 in the middle. That gives us total control of the wall. The wall can't move now and we know it's plumb. What I'll do now is lift this up. Getting your fingers under it is the hardest bit. Got it? There we go. So the corner's pretty much plumb now. Just going to get a couple of screws in through this upright here onto that upright on the other wall, and that'll hold it there for us, and we can then just go along with some more 100mm screws and screw it in place. What you should now have is that wall perfectly level and that wall there perfectly level. So we know it's plumb, so if I grab this big square, what we can now do is just make any fine adjustments just to make sure that's perfectly square. So Chris has now just kicked that over a little bit, which has closed that gap up a couple of mil. And once we're done the same the other side, we'll fix the bottom plates down to the ground so they can't move. To fix my bottom plates down to the concrete pad, I start by drilling a pilot hole through the timber. I then follow this with a 6mm masonry SDS bit. I then use these 100mm DeWalt concrete anchors. They're perfect for holding down timber to this concrete, and we use an impact driver to fix those in place. Guys, if you're enjoying the video, hit like because that helps it reach more people on YouTube, and hit subscribe if you haven't already because you don't want to miss out on all the videos I've got to come. Okay, so we have 3 walls bolted down to the concrete pad. Them concrete anchors we used, there'll be plenty to hold this down. You've got plenty of weight on it as well, so it's not going to go anywhere. What we're going to do now is move on to the 2 front walls. So our front wall's built in 3 stages really. You've got a cheek either side of whichever door you're having. So we'll have a cheek on the left hand side, a cheek on the right hand side, and then there'll be some infill panels in there that tie the lintel in, and that'll support all the weight above the door. That lintel will need to tie in to the 2 cheeks beside the door. It'll all make a little bit more sense when we start building. So we'll do another very little artistic drawing so that I can show you how the front wall's going to be constructed. So we've got our doorway first of all, which is going to be 1700mm. So that's the doorway. Now we'll have a lintel running across the top of the doorway. I know it's a little bit wobbly, I promise our lintel won't be. And that lintel will sit on 2 cheeks. And the cheeks will be formed of a couple of little infill panels, these 2 here. And they need to be 300mm. And then the rest of the wall will be made up of a couple of panels that we're now going to build, which will form the rest of that 6 metre length of wall, because obviously we've got a 6000mm wall here. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. We'll start by building the 2 1/850s, then we'll put them little 300 panels in, and then we'll put the lintel in. So let's get cracking and I'll show you as we go along how we do it. Now if you remember right back to the start of the video, this front wall here is slightly taller than the back wall. So these front uprights between the bottom plate and top plate need to be 2120. So we're building our front walls exactly the same way as we did the walls that I showed you previously, and then you can see just like before I'm going round and nailing OSB onto those walls, and then we're going to lift the walls up into position. Right, that's somewhere roughly where we want it. Again, like before, we'll get it level, we'll get it plumb, get it square and bolt it to the ground. Another cold morning on the workshop build. We haven't had much favourable weather in this, have we? I did all that work in the summer and then came outside in the winter to build a workshop. Call me mad. So what we've done is we've built these little panels here. They're 300mm, and what they do is allow our lintel to tie into them. So the lintel's an 8x2, so that's 200mm. So we've made these panels 200mm shorter than the top of the wall. It's for our lintel, that's for our lintel to sit on top. It's an 8x2 lintel. So we'll bolt the 2 together with some coach bolts. So we'll have a 4-inch lintel in effect. And that'll sit on top of these 2 panels. So what we'll do now is fix these 2 panels in place, make sure they're all nice and plumb and square, and then we'll get the lintel made up and put on top. So we make sure everything's nice and flush, and then we'll fix this in place. So we know that that is going nowhere. So you can see we've got a nice big 8x2 for our lintel. The length of that lintel needs to be 2266. So we're going to cut 2 lengths of 2266 and then bolt them together. So we're using 6 M8 bolts with a nut and a washer on the end to bolt the lintel together. We will space them evenly along the lintel and also stagger them from the top to the bottom of the piece of timber as well, just so that we don't warp or split the timber in the middle. And then we just trim the end of the bolt off with a grinder. So we've got the lintel up, and we're going to now place it on top of these supports. You can see we've got this string line here, so we know when it's perfectly flush with both of the cheeks. So we'll just lift that in place, sit it on the support pieces, and now we can tie it in using some 100mm screws in the bottom and in the sides. We're just holding it in place so it's perfectly flush, and then we'll just tie it in, and using the screws instead of nails just pulls it nice and tight. So we'll tie it in, a couple of screws at the bottom, a couple of screws in the sides. Do that both sides and you can see the lintel's perfectly flush with the top of the wall plate. Because the lintel doubled up is 90mm and the timbers here are 100mm, what you get is a slight gap discrepancy. But what we're going to do is, just before we put this bit of OSB on the front here, we'll just get a few packers and we'll just put some packers behind it to bring the OSB flush. It's easier to do that than to do it on the plasterboard on the inside. Packing out plasterboard is not quite as easy as packing out OSB, so I'd rather do it this way. And then that's pretty much it for the walls. We've got 4 walls now. In the next episode, what we're going to do is get the roof on. We're actually going to do that today, so we're going to start filming again in a minute for that episode. So make sure you don't miss that one. If you've enjoyed this video, click on one of these because you're bound to enjoy them as well, and I'll see you guys in the next one.